Welcome to the Essential Tax Podcast with your host, Mishkin Santa. In each episode, we'll take the complex world of tax, all the jargon, acronyms, and stuff that make your eyes glaze over, and explain it in an impactful way to understand the complex and unknown areas. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, thewolfgroup.com. Now, here's the host of Essential Tax Podcast, Mishkin Santa.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the podcast. I am super excited to have on today Shavon Smith. We're going to get to Shavon here in a minute, but the reason why I wanted Shavon on the podcast is because in my practice, a lot of times I get clients that will come to me and say, Mish, I'm going to start a business, or I have a business, or I'm trying to maintain a business, or I'm growing my business, or I want to close my business. And they're asking a lot of questions that are not really tax related. Now, there are a lot of intersections with tax. So if I'm going to close a business, like I'm going to liquidate it or I'm going to sell shares, there's obviously some kind of tax that you need to potentially calculate at the federal and maybe even state levels. But there's a lot of other non-tax related aspects that people need to consider. And you don't want to let, in my opinion, you don't want to let the tax tail wag the dog. And so I thought to myself, well, gosh, I've been working with Shavon for a really long time. We co-present on a lot of stuff together, and I think she would be great to come on and give us kind of the business aspects of those things. Shavon also has a new book she's written, so I want to have her speak about that. But that's my kind of introduction to this episode. Let's just take a second. Shavon, tell us about yourself. Give the audience some insight into your education, background, jurisdictions that you're licensed in, just so that they can get to know who you are.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, and I'm very much looking forward to this conversation. So I am a lawyer. I graduated from Howard University School of Law in Washington, D.C. Before that, went to Michigan State, where I majored in international relations and political theory, knowing that I wanted to go to grad school for something, and it just ended up being law. And so I have been practicing law. It'll be 20 years next year, which is insane that it's been that long, but spent the first part of my career working in the court system. So I clerked for a judge on the trial court and the Court of Appeal. So I've seen the kind of culmination of business disputes or disputes between people in front of the courts. And then I spent about 6 or 7 years working in big law, representing kind of big corporations on litigation matters and other matters. And then for the past 10 years, I've owned my own firm, small firm, working with business owners, entrepreneurs, small businesses, small nonprofits, and helping them protect their businesses.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about your firm for a second. How big is it? What services do you provide? Just give us the 30-second commercial, of your firm.
Absolutely. So we primarily help clients in Maryland, Michigan, and DC because those are the places that we're practiced to license to practice law. It's myself. I have an associate. I have an assistant, and then we use contract help when things get overloaded. So definitely a small but mighty firm. And we operate as, I always tell people I'm a fractional general counsel. So I work with clients who are big enough to have a myriad of problems, but too small to have full-time in-house counsel that they would pay. So we serve that role for our clients. So our work is pretty broad, everything from formation and setup and startup, and then all the compliance things that a person has to do once they do that. People often think you form a business and it's done, like you form a business and you have to kind of keep doing things. So we make sure our clients stay compliant. We do a lot of contracts, whether it is with our clients' vendors, their customers, their partners. So we spend a lot of time drafting, reviewing contracts. We counsel our clients on employment issues, just bringing on employees, or even if they need to get rid of them. We help them on real estate matters. If, typically at one point a business will get large enough, they may want to buy the place where they're operating. It may make tax sense for them to do that. And so we help them with those matters, and just plain old disputes and strategy, just helping them think about the business and planning ahead to make sure that the business is protected.
Yeah, so it's funny about your background because I think about my background a little bit. I actually started off when I was in law school, King County prosecutors, and I did voir dire, which is not as people think it's a fun job. It's not as sexy as people make it out to be. But I remember that
Yeah.
the chief counsel of IRS in that area, I think was came in as a friend for the King County prosecutor, and they kind of watched me as I did one of my. I didn't even know they were in the audience, and later, he kind of approached me and said, "Look, we're looking for litigators to help out in SBSE, which I think that was the name back then. It's a division of chief counsel, and that's how I kind
Right.
of my inroad into tax. Can you tell me, like, what was the seminal thing that kind of got you into what you do in business? I mean, the way I look at you is kind of almost like if I'm looking at a doctor, you're kind of like a family practice doctor, right? You're like the hub
Exactly.
where you can do a whole lot. You have a whole lot that you can do, and then maybe if you need to bring in a super specialist to make that referral. But how do you kind of get to where you went to you were, like you said, you did your graduate, you decided to go to law school. How did you get from that
Mhm.
to where you're at today?
So you did raise a good point. So we do serve as generalists for our clients, but I've worked really hard to build a network of specialist people like you that I can call when things get tricky. So for instance, a client recently needed to do a H-1B process. I'm like, not your girl, but I can
Right.
help manage the process because I know people, certain trademark things. So I definitely also take the burden of my clients of having to manage a lot of counsel and other things that they may have to do. And that's part of what we do. In many ways, I think I fell into it. I think I had always wanted to be a business owner. The legend, it's not legend, it's true. My parents met in a store that my grandfather owned. And so I always felt like this kind of in my blood, like this sense of kind of ownership, being a business owner. And I had friends who were business owners. And I think I was just kind of fascinated by the idea of taking an idea and starting something. And so I almost feel like my work is interesting because I am that person that I own a business, but I also serve the population of people that I've always kind of admired. So it really was just a choice. Like the work that I do now is not that similar to the work I was doing in big law, with the exception of kind of practicing in some litigation that comes up. So it really was like that seems interesting. This population and group of people seem interesting. I should work with them. Is really how it kind of happened.
Did you ever want to go into a different area of law? People always say, well, what would you do if they got rid of the Internal Revenue Code, or people, no longer had to pay taxes? And I personally would love that. I'd be like, that's great. I mean, I'm out of a job, but I know I could go do other things. I like
Yeah.
contracts. I like property law. I mean, there's other things I could go do. But is there anything that you would, if you could go back in time, and be like, oh, I wonder what the Marvel alternative reality universe of my life would have been if I had done this? Is there like an alternative
Yeah.
passion that you maybe have in the background there?
Absolutely. I think when I applied to law school, I was debating between a master's in international affairs and law school. And someone told me lawyers can do anything, which is kind of true, but not completely true. And so I was like, oh, I'll go to law school. But I think in an alternate universe, I would be doing some sort of international law. Like I would have worked for the State Department or worked on kind of policy, something, working internationally. But the great thing about the work I do now is, I do have clients who are overseas and they're opening up businesses here, clients who have interest in being overseas. So I am able to scratch that itch a little bit and hope to be able to do more of that.
Yeah, and I certainly want to talk to you a little bit more about that one aspect you just brought up about those clients offshore.
Mhm.
On a daily basis, I talk to a lot of people, and I can tell you my top three common questions that people ask. What are three common questions that people ask?
Yeah, so number one is kind of entity formation. Like, what sort of entity should I be? Should I be an LLC? Should I be a corporation? I would say the second one is just um, what can we put in this contract to make sure that I'm protected? Like, what can we add? And then the third one is how can we set this up so that I'm protected? So people are always most concerned about protection. And sometimes the concern is a little unreasonable. Like people will say things like, well, I just want to make sure we don't get sued. I'm like, you can't control that. Like you can't
Right.
control a person not suing you, but you can make sure that you have your documents in place and everything that you need. But all of the questions typically are surrounded around, are we protected? you know, are we going to be okay? Like, is something going to happen if we sign this? People are most concerned about that.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, I didn't invent the rainy day, but I can help you get a big umbrella.
Exactly.
Okay, what are the most common non-legal questions I get asked? So you were just saying earlier about the H-1B visa, which is an immigration
Hmm.
visa. What are some common non-legal questions or questions that aren't in your practice area that you run across? Maybe like your top three.
I would say we don't do a lot of intellectual property in our firm, but I know,
Mhm.
enough. So people definitely have questions about that. And that always, again, comes down to protection. I get a lot of questions just about maybe marketing or partnerships, just like kind of clients looking for ways to grow and obtain new clients. And I think because I work with so many business owners, I do have some understanding of kind of marketing and market share and growing a business in that way. So that's another area. And I think I always get asked just for referrals. Like
Oh,
people, clients are hiring and they're like, well, do you know anyone who does X? Do you know anyone who does PR? Do you know a good banker? Like I get a lot of, can you connect us to someone who does X? Which is great. And that's part of, what we do here is make sure our clients have all the resources that they need and connect them to other people that can just help protect their business and help grow their business.
yeah. I mean, I think you are a lot like me in that aspect. I think sometimes I feel like I'm Grand Central Station, like I'm just
Yes.
directing traffic. Okay,
Yes.
you're here, but you need to go over there now.
Exactly. I mean, I definitely spend not a day goes by where I'm not sending someone a referral or saying you should talk to this person. And I think that that's part of the game and part of the business.
Okay. All right. All right. Last question about the common questions you get asked, because this is a
Yeah.
tax podcast. What would be like your three common tax questions that you get asked?
Yeah, I think people want to know, particularly when I'm drafting corporation documents like shareholder agreements, partnership agreements, people want to understand the tax terms, like what does it mean to be the tax representative? Like what's that liability? So just a lot of questions around the tax terms that end up in those documents is number one. Two, people want to know, I mean, everyone wants to minimize their tax liability. They want to know, how can we set this up that our tax liability is minimized? And I would say the third big tax question that comes up, um hmm,
I would assume it.
probably like employment taxes, like people just kind of wanting to understand those sort of taxes as well.
Yeah, I was going to say the ancillary taxes are like the common question I get is, well, what question am I not asking? And then it's like you start going through that diatribe of like, well, you got to pay employment. Did you know you got to pay sales tax? You got to pay employment tax, and
Right.
so those
But
are
the
some.
thing I always remind my clients is, I am a lawyer, and we're good at this, and we know enough tax to know when to tell you that you should talk to somebody else. So I
Right.
think it's important that business owners know part of the game is building a team,
Right.
and having the right people on the bus to make sure you're getting kind of complete advice.
Right. I do that too. I try to humanize it though a little bit because I go, hey, look, I got my tax hat on right now, and you're
Yeah,
asking a non-tax question. I can't address that because I can't give you advice outside of tax. Let me take that
right,
off for a second though, and just as a person, here's
right,
what I would tell you you probably should do and you should think about.
right.
Because I think our clients pay us a lot of money to try to give them solutions, and I try not to be part of the problem. I try to help them move
Exactly.
along if I can.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Um, Basic question. So we're here in 2024. It's
Yes.
August 2024. Someone comes to you and says, Siobhan, I want to start a business.
Yes.
What what's the first thing you're kind of getting into, or what kind of goes through your head, or what's your kind of checklist going to start off with when someone tells you that they want to start a business here in 2024, or even going into next year 2025? Or is there anything any danger zones they need to know about, any big picture items that they need to consider? Like what are some things that you're going to kind of immediately want to get into with them?
I mean, I think it's interesting because just like you said, like we wear multiple hats and I have my lawyer hat on, but sometimes I take off my lawyer hat and I say, okay, especially when it's a very new business and I hear a person's business idea. And I often find myself saying, like, could you tell me a little bit about your revenue model? Can I help make me understand, like, really how you're going to make money? So I think going into this these coming years, election, things are uncertain. Just making sure that business owners understand that you may have to pivot on whatever your plan or idea is, and then making that maybe part of your process is one thing. Two, credit markets aren't great, I don't think. So I think a lot of people start a business thinking that, and then I can get money for this business or go to the bank and get money. And that might not always be the case. Like understanding that you may have a bit of a runway before you start making money and before a bank is interested in giving you money. So I would say just planning for that when you're starting a business is one. And then also just the basics of thinking about tax liability and setting your business up properly, making sure you have all the documents in place, making sure you have all the right people on your team. So that's kind of the given of what I would say. But I would think just particularly thinking about where we are in the economy and society, those are some of the things I would raise as well.
And do you kind of like a pilot that takes off on a plane, right? They have a big checklist and they're going through it with, the co-pilot and the tower or
Yes.
whatever. Do you use like a standard checklist? Do you have a checklist? Do you create a checklist, like a tailored one for your clients of things that they need to accomplish? Or how do you go about giving them the recipe card, if you will, to bake the cake?
Yeah, so there's an ebook on my website. It's working with the attorney for your small business, because I felt like when I first started doing this, people would come to me and say, "I know I need a lawyer, but I don't know what I need you for." Like they
Okay.
don't understand that. And so there is a bit of a checklist there. And so I start from the beginning. And I always liken a business to like you just gave birth to a new baby.
Right.
Okay. And the baby needs to get all their documents in place. The baby needs the social security number, i.e. the EIN. It needs to be properly registered with the state. So there's a whole checklist for the things you need to do with the state. And now I always tell people, if you're in business and you're not making money, you have a hobby. So we want to do the things that get you to the money the quickest. So for clients, when we talk about contracts, I say, your contracts with your customers are going to be paramount because that's how you make money. So the next set of things we kind of work through are, what documents do you need to protect this baby? So it is, one, you want to make revenue. So what documents do we have in place with our customers? And two, internally, you can't necessarily do everything yourself. So are you hiring people? Are you bringing in contractors? Are you properly classifying them as contractors? So we kind of move from the state piece to the people piece as well. And so those are the kind of the first two areas that I work on with clients. And then I move to kind of the other stuff, like the intellectual property. Like, even if I can help you, if there's something here that needs to be protected, like, let's think about what that is. Let's kind of list that out and find you the help that you need as well. So that's probably like the second area that I go to with people. And then we talk about, well, where are you operating? If you're operating in your house, obviously in step one, we would have taken care of all those licenses and everything that you need. But if that's not the case, and if there's a lease and there's real estate, we want to make sure all of that is, protected as well. And I would say just the final, in the beginning of talking through things with people, is making sure they understand that this is an ongoing process. Like, once the conversation we had when you start, like, we have to make sure we maintain these things. We have to revisit your documents sometimes. We have to revisit your contract sometimes. So it's kind of a, let's get it in place and just come up with a cadence where we're coming back to it when necessary.
Yeah, that's a common mistake I see from a lot of business owners. They get it all set up, they do it great, they do it fantastic, and then they never go back and check, like,
Right.
did I follow the instructions to a T? Did I miss anything? Did I go back for a 1 year checkup? And I gotta be honest with you. I love the fact that you have an ebook about how to deal with attorneys, because it's one of the things I've seen it in my career, that a lot of
Yeah.
people, I don't think, understand how to deal with professionals. They use what
Right.
they see on TV or in a movie, and I'm like, that's really not what real life is like. And they have
Right.
this very awkward expectation of what it should look like and feel like. And you kind of have to almost train them when they're a new client, like, this is how you deal with our
Exactly.
firm. This is how you deal. And so I love that you've kind of taken the time to outline that for how best to deal with you and your firm. That's fantastic. Um,
Absolutely.
let's pivot for a sec. Let's go back to what you said earlier about the foreign companies doing business inside the United States. So we just talked about common things that you would kind of go through when you're starting a business. What if you have someone that's outside the United States that wants to operate a business inside the United States? We're seeing a lot of that. We've seen a lot of that for many years now. People kind of trying to
Right.
come inbound. into the U.S. What are some things that is it the same for them, or there's something different that they need to consider?
Yeah, there are definitely differences. I think one of the main ones on my end is if you're, the S corporation status is a lot of people want to take that for tax advantages, but that may not be available to you depending on kind of your status as a citizen or not as a citizen of the U.S. So that's one thing to think about. I've had clients who have raised money, and if you're raising money from people who are outside the US, those documents are different for the SEC, like kind of making sure you're
Oh,
compliant, than for clients that are, in the US that you're raising funds from, depending on how you're raising money. So that's one thing to think about. One of the things I know you and I have worked on before, depending on the type of visa that a person has, it could affect what sort of entity they choose, depending on if it's high growth, if it's not high growth. So I think it's one of those. What I love about that and the work that you and I have done together is it always reminds me of, don't. And a lot of times what happens is people get their advice from like YouTube or TikTok, but it's
right.
not complete. Like
Yeah.
it's almost like, yeah, an LLC is great, but it's not if. It's like almost that those exceptions that people miss out on when they don't go to a professional for advice.
Yeah. Let's kind of pause here for a second. Let's define some terms because you've used a couple terms in that last explanation. So
Yeah.
the limited liability company, LLC,
Yes.
talk about that for a second. And then you used S corporation, which is an
Yes.
election for tax purposes. Talk about the different types of, the difference between, because I ask the question all the time on my end. I'm like, well, what type of company do you have? And people are like, LLC. And I'm like, I don't care. I need to know, like, is it an S corp, C corp, partnership? Because I'm a tax person, right? I
Right.
don't end. But so kind of help our audience understand the differences about the terminology there and what those things mean, generally
Yeah,
speaking.
so yeah, limited liability company, LLC, limited liability company, you file articles of organization with your state. When you file your tax, depending on your tax election, it's kind of a pass through entity. The way the entity is taxed, the benefit is it gets you the liability protection. The spiel is that it's usually easier to maintain, although people take that ease and get a little lax. I think sometimes in terms of you still have to have things in order. You will still
Right.
want to make sure you have things compliant. And then the corporation, obviously, you file articles of incorporation with your state. You would issue shares for your entity. And then when I mentioned S Corp, that being a tax designation. So people, like you're right, people often call and say, I want to form an S Corp. And again, they've gotten maybe incomplete advice somewhere that S Corp is really a tax designation for either your corporation or your limited liability company.
Right. So it's a movement that from the natural designated
Right.
default form. Okay. Great. Yeah. All right. So now let's go talk about funding here for a second, because I think from what I understand, you do help people, or you do kind of give some advice
Yes.
about small business admin loans.
Yes.
Talk to me about that funding, and
Yeah.
then also I want to talk about businesses that are already in play. And you're talking about banks giving them funding maybe outside of small business administration loans, but are there other types of things that are floating around these days that you're seeing a lot of? So, in my world, accounting firms, we're getting bombarded by private equity. That they seem to. I
Hmm.
always tell people, money never sleeps, and private equity's got a lot of it, and it just makes you want to go out there and buy a lot of stuff. But talk to me about the different funding sources that you kind of work with and see in your practice these days.
Yeah, so SBA is definitely a common one for smaller businesses. A lot of my clients, what happens is when they want to buy the real estate that that they're going to operate their businesses in, they'll do like a 7A loan. And what it is really the SBA acts as a guarantor. So then it makes a bank more likely to kind of lend you money for that process of buying a building or even buying equipment if you're in some sort of heavy equipment sort of business like construction or farming or something like that. So it's typically a two-part process. And I always tell people it's longer than just going for a conventional loan because the bank has their due diligence and then the SBA has a whole other due diligence. So I always say a bank wants like your left arm and your kidney, and then
Right.
SBA wants additional body parts on top of that in order to process the loan. And so it can be kind of a lengthy process, and it can be um, expensive money, so to speak, meaning that the fees can rack up, because when you are the borrower, you are paying the attorney's fees, you're paying all the money to get the money. And so sometimes when you're going through that process, I always remind people, factor that into what you're thinking about the loan. But and I've definitely worked with clients who've used it to purchase buildings or purchase operating businesses as well. So that's one way to go. I've rarely seen very new businesses take on SBA loans. I mean, typically you would have been in business for a while, operated,
Yeah.
have all the financials and everything that the
They
SBA
need to
will
see
be
proof
requiring.
of concept or
Exactly.
possibility. Okay.
Right. And again, like I said, the SBA is acting as a guarantor, but they also typically, especially for new businesses, are looking for the business owner to act as a personal guarantee. They might want to, add your house and all the other things as well. Because a bank is always going to want to get as many options as possible to collect on that debt as well.
That's
And
great.
then your question about other types of funding, obviously you can just get a conventional loan from a bank. And I know, especially for a lot of professional services like dentists, doctors, banks are very frequently targeting them, just because it's kind of high growth. It's going to make revenue if a person is running it properly. So some banks will have special programs for different types of professionals that they may be targeting for whatever moment may be. And then the part about private equity, obviously that's an option as well. A PE partner is like bringing on another business partner, because you
Yeah.
have to answer to them and their terms all the time. Whereas a bank kind of gives you your money and you can go about your business, pay your bills, give us your financials when we ask for them. So, when you're thinking about funding sources, you want to think about, are we looking for the advice and expertise that a PE can bring into this? Am I looking to build a business that I'm going to sell and exit from, or am I trying to build something that I hold for the rest of my life? And that way, and then that can help you determine like what's the best source of funding for your business. And for a
Right.
lot of businesses, one of my clients always says the best source of funding is your client. So to just
There you go.
grow, bootstrap, and then you're only answering to yourself, and you're funding with the clients that you're bringing in.
That's right. I think with the PE stuff, it's an interesting area because I know it really hit the medical profession hard
Yeah.
several years back, and now it's I think hitting the accounting and law professions.
I have heard for the accounting firms that's been a big, that they're definitely targeting that now, and kind of maybe adding more technology to those firms than before.
Yeah, well, there's a resource allocation issue with accounting firms. Not enough people are getting accounting degrees. People always ask me like, how do I get my tax return done faster? And I'm like, step one, talk to the young people, make them go get their accounting degree.
Yes.
Step two, have them stay in the accounting profession and keep going with
Yes.
it. A lot of them give up and they don't want to continue going with it, and they don't want to get the degree, and they don't see the it's not, like as I said earlier, it's not sexy, it's not desirable.
Yeah.
I think with PE and accounting firms, it can solve certain issues, right? You want to get, partners that are aged out or maybe close to retirement. You want to kind of move those people out. You want to bring younger people up and give them more equity, more income, more responsibility. You want to solve your resource allocation issue. You want to get heavy funding. But you're right. Then you're kind of, okay, there's a new master in town, or there's a new,
Right.
that's a bad term, but there's a new person that's kind of leading the charge here, and we answer to them, and you're no longer really in charge of it. And at some point you get flipped out, your business will get flipped to a bigger business, and then
Absolutely.
it's done.
I mean, and that's the point. They are gambling on 30 companies right now,
Mm.
and they know that a few of those companies are going to be the big return. I mean, yours may be or may not be, but they're looking for an exit. The bank just wants their money back plus interest. The PE wants a larger return. And so just thinking about how that's going to affect how you operate your business.
Of course. All right. I know you do a lot of work with empowering women entrepreneurs. Can you, that's something that I think, the Wolf Group, a lot of people don't know this, but I think like 95% of the Wolf Group are women. And,
Mm.
and so we're really, yeah, it's like, there's only like 2 or 3 men that are in the Wolf Group as far as operating staff go. But, we're really big on that aspect in our company, just because of the population that we have there, and what they
Mhm.
represent. Can you tell us about your work in that area and kind of your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, women are one of the fastest growing groups of people starting businesses. Black women in particular, I think, are the fastest group starting businesses. So just supporting that population of people who are going out, leaving for lots of reasons, corporate America, whether it is, glass ceiling or childcare, and just supporting them as they go into entrepreneurship and supporting their businesses is definitely big in what we do. Our staff is all female here as well, in our firm. So definitely important that we empower women business owners.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. So at the Wolf Group, our managing partner is a woman, and a lot of I love what they bring to the table. So that's great. Okay, can you talk to us about your experience with the G4 community, and just for the audience, so that they know who those people are? The G4 visa, it's a visa that's given to international
Mm-hmm.
organization employees, which is pretty big in the area that we're in, like as far as the area of the world that we kind of practice in. So in Virginia, Maryland, DC, you have a lot of international organization employees for the World Bank, the IMF, IDB, IFPRI. There's probably 30 to 40 different international organizations in the DC area alone. It's a very specialized type of visa. Their income is treated a lot differently than, say, a normal US person. They also have very specialized rules when it comes to owning and operating a business. Can you talk a little bit more about that and your experience with that?
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of presenting at the IMF and World Bank kind of on these issues of starting a business for people who hold these visas. I mean, thinking through the tax implications that are a little bit are a lot different for other individuals who may be wanting to start LLC. So a lot of the questions surround, what sort of entity should I have, and if it doesn't make sense for me to form a certain sort of entity because of my tax obligations as a G4 holder, how else can I protect myself? Like, what else can we put in place? Because that's the point of a business entity, right? It's a tax question and it's a liability question. Like, how can I protect my personal assets, and how can I navigate the tax code as a in my business? And so, just maybe putting things in place if the entity doesn't make sense, to make sure that the business is protected. Or if a person comes and they decided to start a business on their own, and they realize a year or so later after talking to their tax professional that it wasn't the best choice given their visa, how do we roll that back? How do we dissolve the business that we created to get, a better tax advantage?
Okay, great. Are there any big changes that you're seeing at the state level for Virginia, Maryland, DC, Michigan that people should be aware of that are kind of maybe up and coming or could come in pretty soon? Or even with the IRS, anything big there that people should take advantage of? I know Secure Act 2.0, which we probably shouldn't get into all the nuts and bolts on that here, but um, are there things that people should keep in mind when it comes to their business if they're currently operating one about changes?
Yeah, I would say for DC, Maryland, and Virginia, it's a place where the minimum wage continues to go up, and knowing and tracking what that is. So just knowing what your obligation is to pay and how that affects your payroll taxes. I would say that that's one area to stay on top of. And then the non-compete ban will go into effect soon. So if you are operating a business and you have any sort of non-compete clause with your employees, kind of knowing what you need to do there, I would say, is a big thing. I would say always looming is this concept of independent contractor versus employee, and making sure you're properly classified. And, I think we may see more happening there as well. And obviously that creates another tax burden when you have to bring people on as employees as opposed to contractors. But I think that that's something to also be aware of. And I think, just politics and business, as much as it just goes hand in hand. So I think just kind of being aware of what's happening in politics, who ends up in office, and how that may affect the tax code, how that may affect, not all these Department of Labor laws as well, because a lot of these things are executive orders or regulations that can be rolled back depending on who's in office. So just staying on top of those things as well.
Okay, talk to me like I'm a 3-year-old for a sec, because what you said was very interesting. The non-compete ban. What is that? What does that mean?
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
give me some context around that, and then I want to talk about the misclassification stuff too. But let's start with the non-compete.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sometimes I throw things out as if everyone knows what that means when I say
I
non-compete
heard that
ban.
the other day. Someone mentioned that, and I was like, I didn't know that was a thing. But yeah, go ahead.
Yes. So recently, and why am I blanking on the agency? But essentially, as you know, a non-compete means that, you work for the Wolf Group. If Wolf Group says if you leave, you can't practice tax in Northern Virginia or a 30-mile radius doing the same thing somewhere else. And lots of people were subject to these things. And the argument is always it is a restraint on trade. And a
Mhm.
lot of times it would come up if you worked for one, say you worked in cybersecurity, you worked for one agency, maybe the company you work with lost their contract, you're trying to find a new job doing the same thing, and you're having a hard time. And so that ban means that there are a few instances where you can restrict a person in their work. There are a lot of other things you can do, confidentiality clauses, saying that you can't solicit a person clients, but that's what that non-compete ban means. And so starting September 4th, if you have contracts that have them in there, you want to make sure that you claw employment contracts. You want to make sure you claw those back.
Okay. Call those back, meaning, again, talk to me like I'm a 3-year-old. We're going to completely give a new
We're,
contract. We're
we're
going to,
I would say you do a new contract.
okay, remove that.
But something that says, this aspect of your employment is no longer effective.
Okay. Yeah. And I think I like the clause. I'm okay with the clauses. So I've never been okay with the non compete clauses because I think what you said is accurate. We don't want to, take someone's livelihood away just because there's been a change in circumstances. But I do like the clauses in there about the non-solicit, or if you are going to solicit, there's like maybe a fee that you pay to
Absolutely.
get the client, whatever. I think those are things that you can kind of do as workarounds in that area. Okay, talk to me for a second about the misclassification issue. This one's been around for a really long time. So I'm like you. I'm in my 20th year of practice, and I think I've heard about this since I first started doing tax. And the big issue in the tax world is that, look, you have someone that's an employee. You
Yeah.
really don't want to deal with all the burdens of an employee, right? All the legal and insurance and all the stuff, all the cost, and so you make them an independent contractor. But from a tax problem, you're not withholding payroll taxes or social security taxes, right? So you've got a big withholding tax issue. If that person is then misclassified and then they're reclassified, that's going to hurt you, not only your business but also yourself individually, because from a tax perspective, we have the IRS, the Internal Revenue Code has what's called the trust fund recovery penalty, which is
Mm-hmm.
called the 100% penalty because they give it to both the business and they give it to both the individual owners. And so that's a tough go there. And they have voluntary disclosure programs for that. But that's still an issue today. We still have businesses running around that are that have employees but calling them independent contractors. We still have that going on.
Absolutely. And I think, you mentioned 20 years, but 20 years ago, we didn't have Uber, DoorDash, all of these companies
No,
that
yeah.
really thrive on the gig economy. I mean, a lot of people are surviving on that gig economy, and these platforms can exist because of how they set things up with independent contractors. So definitely even more of an issue. And as you mentioned, it's expensive to have employees. So if you are a small business and you need help and you're trying to find ways to do that effectively, having contractors is what a lot of people do. But as you mentioned, there are a lot of, if you get it wrong, there are a lot of penalties involved with that. And so I definitely get a lot of questions about, is this person properly classified? And it's not a black or white test. The IRS has their checklist that they're looking at. Department of Labor also has a checklist, and really some of the main things are control, like how much control do you have over this employee? Are they doing something that's essential to your business? Are they using the tools that you gave them to for the business? Are they operating in the hours and times and methods that you say? If that's the case, more than likely this person is a contractor. And what most business owners do is say, well, we'll just do it anyway and figure it out later. But the problem is if someone kind of has a bad experience with you and they want to report you, you can end up in a bad situation where you're left paying these penalties that you talked about as well. So I'm often advise clients, like, my advice usually is, this person is probably a employee based on that. If you want to make this a little more appropriate, you should do XYZ. Like,
Okay.
you should kind of restructure the job in this way, or approach it this way. In order to kind of stay compliant. That's usually what people are looking for, is they don't necessarily want to move people to their payroll, but they want to know, well, what can we do to make this appear more like a contractor relationship?
So you will do an analysis for them. You'll kind of let them
Yes.
know where you think they land at for a wide variety of issues, not just tax, DOL,
Right.
all. And then if they say, well, look, I really want this person just to be an independent contractor. How do I get there? That's obviously a negotiation between the two parties. But you would potentially write an independent contractor agreement for them, or something.
I do. I do an independent contractor agreement, which, is important. And then I'll maybe make a checklist of like, do this, don't do that. And you're, more on the right side of this if you do it that way.
Okay, great. Let's shift gears for a second here. There is a lot of hubbub these days about artificial intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
You have the doomsayers that say AI will replace all of our jobs. I've actually heard some people be very positive about AI. Hey, it's going to be. You should look at it as a helpful tool. It's an add-on. It's something that could really help everyone. In our world, I think the big myth floating around, or not myth, but I guess it actually happened, was the attorney that used
Yes. To
AI
write
to do a brief,
yeah.
right? Yeah. Talk to me about your thoughts on generative AI and kind of Chat GPT and how that works in your world.
I mean, I think like any technology, it's like if you were the attorney who said, I'm never going to use a computer, I'm only going to use a typewriter, you got pushed out eventually for people who are using technology and using the internet. So I think that, when I think about like LexisNexis and Westlaw, which are kind of case search platforms, they all have introduced some sort of generative AI. So all the legal technology has some aspect where they're integrating it into their practice. So I think it's important for lawyers to understand it. It's important if you have clients to make sure, if you need to help them draft policies on how they use it in their business as well, or how their employees can approach it. I think that that's an important piece of it. I think when I've asked questions, just kind of test questions, there's always this sense of like, it's right, but not completely right. Like when you get your advice from TikTok and not from a real professional, like, there may be some nuances that are missing from it, but I've definitely used it in marketing. I've used it a lot in kind of redrafting marketing pieces, posts. So I think it's an important thing to kind of integrate into your practice. I think, again, technology, you have to kind of move with the times when it comes to technology.
That's great. That's great. So you recently wrote a book. Am I right? You're
You
an author.
did, yeah.
I'm
Yes.
so impressed. I'm like, yes, that's awesome. Tell me about that. I always wanted to write a book. I'm going to go buy a copy of it. Next time I see you, I want you to sign it for me.
Absolutely.
Tell me about your book. I want to know everything about it. What made you want to write it? What's it about? Give me the whole spiel on it.
So it's called Tell Me About the Hard Part: 5 Steps to Help Businesses Face, Solve, and Prevent Problems. And it, I always tell people, one of my aunts is an artist, and she always talks about this. One of her magnus opus pieces was an idea from God. And this book definitely was the same thing. It kind of just fell in my spirit and heart and lap. And so really what it is I felt like I would have business owners come to me with problems, and people, and this isn't even a business owner thing. I think it's a people thing. People feel very paralyzed when they're faced with something, especially when they're in the thick of it. And I felt like I just had this way of thinking through things and analyzing things. So I said, I want to put, my brain in a book. So, pretty much to speak. And so it's not necessarily a legal book, although there are some legal principles talked about, but it's really more of a business problem solving book. So the first step I start with is facing it. I think, and that's where a lot of business owners fail. So I talk about facing it, diagnosing your problem, because, sometimes people they know there's a problem, but they can't quite pinpoint like what is the thing that's happening here. So, and then the next part is quantifying it, because sometimes you have a $200 problem and sometimes you have $1 million problem, and how big that problem is really is going to affect how you approach it and who you bring on to approach it as well. And then I talk about treating it. So now that we faced it, we've diagnosed it, we know how big it is, what are we going to do to treat it? And then the biggest part, where I think both of our work lands, is preventing it. Like, what can we do in the future to make sure we don't face these sort of problems again? So I talk a lot about kind of the symptoms of things like, It could be like if you have a business and your turnover is really high, you got to look into that. Like, because there could be a lot of reasons. It could just be your job description doesn't match and people get there and it's not working. Or it could be that you have a person managing them that shouldn't be managing them. Like, but you can't just look at the turnover as a problem. You kind of have to dig deeper to say what's really going wrong here. So the book really helps people walk through that.
That's awesome. That's fantastic. Love it. Is there a works for maybe a second book? Is there something else kind of floating down?
I think so. I think what I'm thinking is to tackle specific issues. And I would say a big one where people get paralyzed is dealing with creditors. Like if you maybe are having some downtimes in business, dealing with landlords, dealing with your banks, dealing with people that you owe money to, which becomes a part of business. And it's not the end of the world. There are strategies and ways to do that. I've definitely been successful in helping clients kind of not file bankruptcy and kind of negotiate these things. So I think I may have a book kind of focused, issue specific on dealing with certain types of problems.
Yeah, I mean, I've kind of been ringing that bell a little bit that I think bankruptcy will come back and make a big splash I mean, if the economy goes south, it's a natural kind of outcome for that. So that I
Yeah.
think a lot of people avoiding that outcome, I think, will be super interesting to go through. Okay, I got two last questions for you.
Yes.
So the first question is, and this is near and dear to my heart. So at the Wolf Group, our mantra for this year is health. We want to
Yeah.
make sure everyone in our company is super healthy, not just from like a physical aspect, from a mental aspect, like all around health. That's we're using the general term there. It's been my observation that professionals in general are not really healthy people. I mean, whether it's not eating properly, sitting at your desk for too long, the constant, interruptions from say a Teams or email,
Yeah.
I've read a book called Busy Brain. People have professionals that do knowledge work. We call
Absolutely.
that, the adult ADD, the anxiety, you can't sleep at night, things like that. Talk to me about your kind of the way that you look at that, the way that you deal with that. For example, I'm a big gym person. I went
Yeah.
this morning. I have a certain program. I mean, if I miss a day at the gym from my schedule, I'm trying to be very as consistent as possible. It's like my entire day is kind of off. It's not ruined per se, but it's kind of like off kilter.
Right.
Like I've gone rogue. Talk to me though about your thoughts on health.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the work that we do, it can be incredibly stressful. You deal with a lot of people that can be very stressful. So you have to kind of maintain the vessel that you use to do the work. So I definitely look at it that way. And I'll remind myself that, the work is the work, but it's not who I am. And so you kind of have to separate yourself from it a little bit. So health is very important to me. I likewise went to the gym this morning as well. I'm training for the Army 10 miler. So I love to run. So I always try to incorporate running, kind of getting outdoors, drinking water, making sure I rest, and then really turning it off. Like there can be days, especially, I mostly work from home. It can just linger. Like you can just look up and it's 7, 8, 9 o'clock and you're working. But sometimes you do have to turn it off just for your mental health, and focus on other things and let your brain do other things and make sure you're getting the proper rest as well. And I think I look at it as progress, not perfection. Just knowing the things that keep me working, keep me focused are kind of trying to eat well, staying hydrated, making sure I'm staying active, surrounding yourself with good people, spending time with people you love to kind of keep your joy up. I think all of those are incredibly important, to your health. And you can't do the work if you're not here. You can't do the work if you're not well. So I think it definitely has to be paramount and part of any business you build, anything you build. You have to think about how am I going to take care of me in the process of this work that I do.
Well, there you have it. I mean, Shavon, I feel like you could have done really well being a psychologist and a doctor and an attorney. Like,
I am a psychologist. I feel like the work definitely lends itself to kind of sitting and being a psychologist.
yeah, that's fantastic. I'm gonna come talk to you when I have some of those issues and let you guide
Okay.
me through that. Be my pathfinder. Okay, very very last question, and I think this is always very important because I want to stress that. Again, it's not when you're dealing with professionals. It's not the stuff that you see on TV. You really have to try to understand, how are we going to, what's our method of dealing with each other? What's our social contract when we start doing it? So
Mm-hmm.
if someone wants to come to you, someone that's not your client, and they want a consultation, or they want to, get on the books with you or speak with you, how does that work? How do they get in touch with you? What should they expect? Like, how's it going to work when they're in your world and dealing with you?
Yeah, so my phone number 202-505-5309. If you call, you'll get a person who'll schedule a consultation with us. Our consultations are complimentary. I usually talk to people for like 20 minutes. Just so, one, I want to know if it's a good fit. I want to understand if I can actually solve your problem. And a lot of times I'm able to kind of just, maybe guide people to resources they need during that call. So that's the first step of kind of coming into our world, is scheduling a consultation. And if we find that I think it's a good fit, I'll likely send you a proposal of here's how we can work together for your business. And we're flexible. So we do some work flat fee. We do some work hourly. We do some work kind of on a subscription basis. So I kind of assess where a person is in business, and we can kind of figure out what's the best path forward for working together.
Okay. And when you say consultation, is that half an hour, 1 hour? I assume you mean non-billable consultation.
Yeah, so we do 20 minutes, and that's usually more than enough time to kind of learn about a person's problem, and see if our firm is a good fit for them.
And is it kind of like speed dating? Like you're just doing the 20 questions, like, because
No, you know what? I take my psychologist approach. I ask people, I thank them for calling me. I typically ask how they found me, if I don't already know. And I just say, what's your problem? How can we help?
okay.
And then sometimes just letting a person talk, you get a lot of the backstory that sometimes is important. And then I can go in from that and kind of hone in on my checklist. Like, I know if they're calling about this, I need to ask these questions. If they're calling about this, ask those questions. A lot of this is in my head, and my associate and I are working to get it out of my head and into into a process. But my first step is to kind of let a person talk, because sometimes a person comes to you, they may be frustrated, they may have tried a bunch of things and don't know what to do, or they may be really excited about something that they're started and they want to talk about it. And so I just let them talk, and then I can kind of weave out what I need from that.
Okay. Well, look, we're going to link in the show notes the how you buy the book. We're going to the ebook link, the website link, how to get in touch with Shavon, some of the stuff that we talked about today. We'll throw all that in the show notes. So if people want to get in touch with you, they can. I personally love using Shavon as a resource. She's one of my top referral sources when someone says I'm doing a business and I need help. I need to talk to somebody. Again, I always tell people, there's the alpha and there's the omega, right? I'm the omega. I'm at the end of the chain. Like, and once all the stuff is done, I'll do the reporting, I'll do the compliance, all that stuff. But a lot of times with the planning on this kind of stuff, that's not my world. You got to have someone that's really into it and does it a lot, and as they say, eats it for breakfast. And
Yeah.
that's been my observation with Shavon. She does a fantastic job with helping kind of shepherd people through there. I think, as you heard today on the podcast, she's going to be your attorney, your psychologist, your doctor,
Yes.
the whole thing. So you get the full package with Shavon. Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
Thank you. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for inviting me to chat with you.
You've been tuning in to the Essential Tax Podcast with your host, Mishkin Santa. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcast, Spotify, and on our website, thewolfgroup.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.